Collision Course is back. Schedule will be on Revolution Radio every Saturday night, 6 to 8 p.m. You get outer space. You get honest answers, real researchers, truthful answers, and a place to engage with questions. Take part in the discussion. Revolution Radio on freedomslips.com hosts Collision Course every Saturday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific Time.
I'm Reverend Medium Tracy Lockwood, and I'd like to invite you to join me as I discuss life from a medium's perspective. I'll be talking about insights that I've gained through readings, with topics like your guides, angels, animal communication, past lives, our transition, and the afterlife. We'll take a deeper look at the metaphysical meanings of symbols and totems, and I'll give you some practical exercises to help you develop your own natural psychic ability. Join me on From a Medium's Perspective.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, it's time to stumble down the road with host Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff and co-host Jenny Vaught as they carry stones, dig holes, and wield their shovels along the way. On Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. This is not a seated event as they talk, run, stumble, carry, dig, drag, laugh, fight, sing and pray, dance and kick and scream, and oftentimes fall. Hey, is that a stone or a buffalo check? Now, here are your hosts for the next 2 hours on carrying stones and digging holes. But I
Hey everybody, this is Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff, your host for the next 2 hours here on Revelation Radio, freedomslips.com. My show is accessible of the information and contact information. If you go to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and on the side, on the left, you'll see schedule. I'm in Schedule A. Click on Schedule A, scroll down to the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and see the bee with the pollen flying towards the flower. And if you click on that, there'll be some more information on how you can get a hold of me and a little bit information about myself. Anyway, while you're there, please, help us keep the network going. Everything that all of the, from the top to the bottom is all volunteer, and we are 100% listener supported. So make sure you go to the funding area while you're on the website and see if there's any options that you can help us. Also, always pushing the heirloom seeds, because I am kind of becoming a seed wacko, seed nerd. So anyway, today, let's see if there's anything else going on. Yep, I think that's pretty good for the old opening. Anyway, so today I have a return guest, Gordon Esau. And did I pronounce that right, Gord?
Esau.
Esau. I know. I always gonna say it wrong. I'm terrible. with languages and names.
Actually, I might even use that new rendition of yours.
All right. So anyway, I have Gord. Last time he was on, Gord's a really good friend of mine. Probably, on my top 5 list of friends that I talk to pretty much daily, just about what's going on. He's up in Canada, and last time he came on, we talked about Bigfoot and his experiences with that. So we didn't really come up with a topic yet. So we thought we would just kind of talk about maybe like what's important or what's up, or, you know, kind of about how we go about it when we talk to each other on the phone. So the conversation is probably going to be all over the map. But I'm going to allow Gord to talk if there's anything that he kind of wants to talk about that he thinks is, you know, important. I'm going to let him go for it. So go ahead, Gord. Is there anything on your mind?
My mind. Oh my goodness. I got to dig deep now. Yeah, there's been some unique things happening around here the last few weeks. You know that I've got this little ongoing battle with the city on the river trails, which has some really fantastic old forests, right? And a lot of people, they look at the cottonwood tree and they don't look at the cottonwood tree as having any real value. They kind of look at it as more of a big giant weed, if anything. And I have to admit, as someone who came from the logging industry where the prized trees were the prized trees, cottonwood was kind of way, way down on the list there. And I admit to not really having that much respect for the tree either. But as I'm going through these trails, and it's really kind of a unique, because there's a shamanic effect to walking through these forests with these big tall trees that grow in there. There's very few, a few cedars, a few firs here and there, but mostly it's cottonwoods, alders, maple, and shrubs. So a lot of people don't really catch it, I think. They may be, even though they're not aware of it. And that's what I really actually suspect with most of these people that go through there. And I've met quite a few of them and chatted with them. There's a lot of awake people that are like very on a spiritual level to a degree or two. And so it can be quite rewarding in there. But what's going on is they're putting in salmon enhancement streams, which means they got a backhoe in there and they're opening up the area so they can dig down and establish stream beds that were never there. And it's and I've noticed they've been a little aggressive, and they've been like chopping away at taking trees out that I don't believe are really necessary. And I can qualify that professionally too, because back in the days when I was a logger, my last stages in that industry were in management, and I was looking after a training project for selective logging. And after that training finished, I was granted the contract to finish cleaning up what was left on the ground from the training. And I took a lot of pride in that, because we're harvesting from inside of a forest, and we're harvesting understory trees that would die off with the evolvement of the forest as it grew and matured. These trees would just die off because they can't reach the sun and they can't get that nutrient connection that they need to flourish, and they just fall away. So we harvest them out while they're still green and it's usable wood, and the forest still stays. It stands and it grows and matures as it would otherwise. So the abilities and the skills to do that kind of work that they're doing, putting these streams in, is can be done without having to butcher the trees to make room for the machine. It's just a matter of being a little bit more forethoughtful, like thinking ahead, planning, and working and maneuvering, so that you're not damaging the residual trees, which are actually the part of that make it all up. Day before yesterday, I had a really good conversation with the guys managing the project. He happened to be there when I came by to check on what they were doing. And at first he was a little reluctant, but I explained where I'm coming from and why. And he's kind of, like, he grasped a lot of the spiritual aspects of nature and all that kind of thing too. So we ended up having a really good discussion, and I could explain these things to him, and I could see he was understanding it. I can't say that he's going to have the ability to adapt it to the projects that they're doing, but I'm kind of hoping that it will make them think a little bit more before going forward. And he said it too when I was talking to him. He said, well, they're just cottonwoods. What do they matter? And he says, have a look. Turn around and have a look. And this is something in the last week, because I've been really struggling with spirit a creator on how to go about this, because it's like watching friends being killed, almost, in a way. I know that's a little over dramatic, but it almost has that same effect, because when you go through there, and when I'm alone, I'm actually visiting with these trees as they go through. And maybe somebody out there in the audience might think, well, that sounds kind of nutty. But there's a professor at the UBC, the University of British Columbia, in the forestry department, who put out a paper last year that says, yes, we can talk to trees, and they can hear us, and they can understand us. And I found that really, really cool, because here we have an institution of science and study coming out, and they're saying, yeah, these things that we who kind of go down that shamanic path that know this already, we're going, well, we got validation. And that shows, to me, that shows that the world is waking up. People are becoming more and more attuned to nature. And we're not maybe there anywhere near close enough to help salvage a lot of the destruction that we're heading towards, but I think we're a good chunk of that. We're closer to making a stride where we can start looking at how we manage our land, our forests, our trees, all of this, how we can start managing it far more effectively, so humanity can still move on with shelter and needs, but also we can move on and protect these forests. We can have forests where people can walk through, enjoy, and who knows, maybe even have studies on how to communicate with these trees and enjoy their company. But there was a phrase to all of this that came on my mind, because I'm thinking, how can I talk to these people and explain it to them? And then it dawned on me, and I think Spirit talks to you in like strange ways. You know this, Bridgette, but all of a sudden this word came up, and it was community. And I thought, whoa, yeah, because you've got, just like when you go downtown Vancouver here in British Columbia, and you meet people from India, you meet people from Africa, you meet people from all over, all different colors and thinking processes and all that. It's the same thing in a forest, right? You've got a variety of trees, right? And they're all interacting in the ground, in the roots, right? They all interact. One supports the other as much. It's a very symbiotic relationship all these plants and trees have. And it is a community. When you look at it, when you stand back and you look into it and you look at a forest, you can't help but see it as anything less than a community. That's what it is, or more than a community, I guess is what I meant. So anyway, I've done some cycling back around, come back on some good revelations. And a couple of, what was that, about 4 or 5 days ago when I told you the story, Bridgette, about the eagle? And that was validation. So there's a railway bridge, so I can cross over the river quite easily when the train doesn't run very often through there. And so when I was getting frustrated and seeing what they were doing, I had to get out of there, right? Because I didn't want to do something crazy, flip out on them, start cussing them or something like that. So I went across the other side so I could observe and kind of reflect and get kind of out of that exact atmosphere and kind of think it through. And somebody noticed this eagle sitting up in a tree. And I had my camera with me. I thought, wow, what a great photo op. So I tried to get a picture of it, but because it's not a viewfinder like on a regular camera, it's a screen with the sunlight and everything, I was having a hard time telling if I had it in frame. And danged if that eagle didn't take off, and he flew out over the river and gained some altitude, and he kind of looked back as he was coming, and I was watching him going, what is he doing? And he came back and he picked a tree that was right beside the river, so right between the trail and the river, and it was more open, and he went right out on a branch where I had 100% view of this eagle, and he posed. He just sat there on there, and I snapped a few shots just to make sure I got one. I'm looking for one good one, so I take a few extras just so when I look at him afterwards, I can pick one that I'd like to keep. And he was patient, waited me out, and once I finished and put the camera away, said, okay, I'm gone, bye. And he waved and gone. He flew off to another tree somewhere. But I thought, well, that eagle basically switched my whole mood around and made me rethink what I was looking at and my concerns, and that's where things started to come back together. So anyway, that's near and close. And Bridgette, you can pick and choose to guide me here, because I'm just going to start carrying on.
All right. So I was gonna throw in a couple different things at you. There are a couple. I'll try to make them really short stories, and you've probably heard these before, Gord. But for the listeners, they're kind of important and valuable, based on what you just said. So back in the day when I was going to Rudolf Steiner College, which was a gem for 25 years in the Sacramento area, to Rudolf Steiner's work, and I took my biodynamic course, I took some nutritional courses, I took some anthroposophy type classes, and I also took this class called phenomenology, which was unbelievable, and it went on for a year. So one of the classes was on leaves, and so during the course of this class, it's a 9-hour class. And since it's a beautiful grounds, we had to go out and, at the on-start of class and get 5 leaves from any kind of plants. And there's so many there's farm plants. There was every kind of tree that was planted there, medicines, you could pick from anything. So everybody got their 5 leaves. And during the course of the day, we did all kinds of things with our 5 leaves. We drew them, we taped them up onto the windows so that we could see through them. We also, tossed them in the air, standing on a chair, so each person could evaluate how the leaf would move in the air. You do all these right and left hemisphere things, right? So you're getting like a really clear picture. You're getting the spiritual and kind of the technical, the science part coming together, which gives you a whole kind of perspective about the leaf. And so towards the end of the class, we were given a ditto sheet, and it had the layer, the microscopic layers of the leaf, the different parts of it. So even though it's thin, if you look at it under a microscope, it's going to actually have multiple layers, like skin and the body, how we have multiple layers. So the ditto sheet had the tree and the layer and the lasagna, and the other ditto sheet that she handed us, the lasagna part looked exactly the same, right? The layer of the leaf was exactly the same as the item on this other sheet. And it was such, after dealing with leaves all day long, and then to have like a bombshell like this dropped on you, I literally cried hysterically all the way home for 3 hours, because I had to commute far to get, all these certifications and stuff like that. And what it was it was a ditto sheet of a rabbit retina. Had the same lasagna structure as a tree leaf. So basically she said, I'm not going to lead you, into what you should believe about these 2 ditto sheets, but you need to study it for yourself. And what it did was it said that the leaf, in a photosynthesis way, when the sun hits the leaf, when there's light presence, the rabbit retina can see as good as the leaf can see during photosynthesis, during the light. So after that, it hit me so hard, it rocked me. I mean, it rocked me for weeks, because now every time, even though I really cared for the garden and all the insects and everything else, when I'm building backyard food productions, now it just took it all to a whole new level, because now I was they're all watching me. So I have to be, even, more tender, and, is how I approach them, not just, come at them with a shovel, because they can, they can see me, but, maybe walk in there to the trees and just say, hey, look, I've got to dig around you because your roots are suffocating, and then this is what I'm going to do for you, right? So preparing them, because they're seeing me come at them with some kind of weapon. So it kind of was just kind of one of those crazy points in my life that I will never, never, ever, ever forget about trees, and how they can actually see you if there's enough light presence. And you always wonder what they see, you know what I mean? I wonder if they see me more as energy, because I don't know how good or rabbit retina sees. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what they see. So
think about the root system. So you're walking into a forest, right? And you're sending vibrations through the ground, which the roots would pick up. And the roots from one tree connect to the roots from another tree, and that goes in all directions, all around. And as you're progressing through the forest, you establish a direction, and they can communicate to the trees ahead of where you're walking through the roots. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. That's a super great point. Yeah.
So they would recognize you. So the next time you went there to do whatever project you're intending, you walk in there, they're going to go, oh, here comes that lady again.
Yeah, no, they'll remember you, like if you keep coming through there, for sure.
Oh, yeah. And then you will start feeling their energy as they become more comfortable with you and get to know you. You will feel your energy, your vibration rise as you're going in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and they look forward to visitors too that they know. They look forward to seeing people.
Yeah, especially if you take the time to acknowledge them, right? And I don't want to be up here because there's a lot of people that use these trails, right? And you can look batshit crazy pretty easy if somebody comes around the corner if you're kind of going into a little bit of a thing. And but I talk to them as I go through, you know, and I go, wow, you're looking really good today. Look at you with the sun coming through your leaves and everything, looking beautiful. You know, I compliment them, and yeah, maybe I do look batshit crazy, but I don't really care overall because I get the sensation that comes back from that. I know that it's not one way, it's two way.
Yeah. Building a relationship. So like a lot of Native people will say, me takiwasan, I'm terrible at language, all my relations, you know, at the end of a prayer or whatever else, they'll say all my relations. And it's because they know how to build relations with all the living things, you know, on the earth, not just humans.
Yeah, my friend up north there a bit from me here, Joe, it's mushroom collection time. And he's really good at that. He's a native holy man, and he's very, very wise. And it's part of the way that I mean, they pick him and his wife. They pick him for eating, and they also pick him to make a few extra dollars too, to help cover off their needs. And I should qualify that a little bit more because these people are amazing. They're in an area where you get a lot of what we call gentleman ranchers. They'll go and buy a 5-acre spread, think that's where they're going to retire and live out their life. So they get some horses, they get some other animals, they have dogs too, and usually big dogs because they want protection for the property. And then they get to a point where we don't really like this. This is work, or something like that. And they decide to sell and go back. Well, now you got these animals. What are you going to do with them, right? And so Joe and his wife Phoenix, what they do is they adopt them, right? They rescue these animals. They've got a big spread deeded to his ancestors of land, and they got over 20 horses. They got chipacas, they got llamas, and they got dogs. It's they're amazing people. Anyway, he's what we're talking about with the mushrooms. He relayed. They were down this way a couple of days ago, so I went and met him for lunch, and he's describing going in and the relationship he had with this one female deer and a couple of her younger ones, and there was a few more deer around, and they were going through the forest too, sort of parallel to him, eating mushrooms. They dig them up with their hooves and work around them, but they don't clean it out. They take a few here and there and keep on going. They're wise, so they want it. And it's the same way Joe, who's native, he has the same mentality. He doesn't just take everything he can find. He takes some here, some there, so that it's always there for the next time around. And this doe started to develop a relationship because she saw that they were competing basically for the same food source. And they started working together. Joe saw what was going on with her, and she saw what was going on with him. And they started working together and sort of helping him. So he'd be kind of following along, and she would be seeing what he's doing, and checking on behind him after he's picked an area, and he sort of, so it was an interesting story. Anyway, little sidebar there.
Well, that's what they're supposed to do. We're supposed to learn from the animals, you know. Hey, the Cherokee have a story that, and I wrote a blog on a long time ago, but basically on takers. And so back when it was just, you know, the native people, and they understood the land and worked with the land and worked, you know, alongside of what is, or everything, or all their relations, they, you know, it had contracts. And they had contracts, you know, with the creator. These are their stories. People would say they're myths, but I think they're fact, actually, personally. But what happened was that the animals made contracts, the deer, because they would go through periods where, you know, maybe they had drought, or the natives had, you know, things that were going on. And so the deer and the bear and the animals made a contract that they could, you know, basically use the animals to keep their people alive, you know, to eat, and the things that they needed from the animals. And so basically,
that's an absolute fact.
Yeah. So basically what happened is that when, you know, and I'm white, so I don't want people to get all huffy, but when the whites came to the Americas especially, they just started killing everything, you know, in sight, and taking way too much. So what happened is that the deer and the bear especially were angry and really hostile towards the human situation. So they went to the creator and the council and said, hey, look, this is the deal. We're done with the whole contract with the humans because it's just gotten really out of control. And so the creator said back, and the council says back to him, says, well, you know, do us a favor and go back and try to communicate this and see if you can't, you know, change the situation with them. And if not, you know, what do you want in exchange? Or, you know, if that doesn't work, come back. So it doesn't work. They go out, they try to talk to the humans, and the humans are not listening. The native people are listening. There's nothing that they can do. You know, they're doing everything that they possibly can do to keep their contract with the animals. So they come back, the deer and the bear, they come back to the creator and the council, and they said, look, it's not working. And then by that time, they were really angry. And so they basically imposed a curse. And so this is a contractual curse, you know, against any people who are takers, who take too much. And the curse was basically, the word that's used for it, I can't say, and I'm not good at it, but it basically translates into rheumatism. So that the whites would be cursed with the rheumatism. Means, you know, joint pain, arthritis, you know, maybe even like chronic fatigue, you know, things that affect the bones and the articulations kind of the joints. So that, because the deer and the bear wanted to give them something that would slow them down and stop them. Not kill them, but slow them down considerably. And now if you think about it, like you go to a grocery store and you know, I see like huge amounts of meat, you know, and I think, do we really need this much meat? I mean, how much of it goes to waste? They said in America, like 40%, sorry, I'm going to go off on a tangent, but they said something like, they said like 40% of all the meat people buy in the grocery stores ends up in some capacity in the you know, the big trash areas, you know, that they fill landfills.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. Now you wonder why, I mean, you know, add to the chemtrails and everything else, but because of the behavior people have, they're making themselves sicker. I mean, literally making them sicker, you know, because they're not
honoring.
No.
They're not honoring anything. But the other thing to that, too, everything's in a process, right? If you ever, you know, the movie I'm going to be talking about, she's, the actress is brilliant, and she plays this true story handicapped woman and who can sense these things. She could sense what the cows are saying.
Oh yeah. I forget what her name is, but yeah, she's a high functioning. Is she Asperger's or autistic?
Probably. Well, both of those fit together, right? But
yeah, exactly.
Asperger's is a good one to use though, because it's sort of like a genius thing. My oldest son has Asperger's, so I know this intimately, right? We get lots of problems, but boy, that kid, if you've got a question, you don't need to go to a dictionary or to an encyclopedia. I just voice it to him, and he comes back with a very articulate answer almost immediately. And you can go dig out that book and look it up, and yeah, he's spot on. So I mean, these people are absolutely brilliant. They're here for a specific reason, and I believe that thoroughly.
And there was a movie that was based on her and her life too. And I'm sorry, I can't remember her name.
I can't remember it too either, but it's a fantastic movie.
Yeah, she changed the way that a lot of the cattle industry, even in the industrial part, how they handle cows and how they, kill them for food, because she saw the distress and the fear in them, and came up with certain better designs and thoughts about how, to handle them better, because she could see them and could feel and understand, basically how they felt.
And that benefits the people who eat that flesh as much as the animal. Because when you got an animal that's going up there, they can sense. They're not stupid. Everybody looks at a cow in the field and they don't really, but they're not. They have their level of intelligence that could rival most humans, but they just can't talk, so we don't see it. And I'm speaking as the totality of humanity mostly. But when these cows go up that chute, right, they can sense what's coming, and the cows that are closer to where they get bonked, they're even more so. So that wave of fear runs right through to the back of the pack, and all that negative energy that's in that adrenaline goes through the blood, and it goes into every square inch of the meat that's in there. And that might even explain why a lot of these people toss the meat out, because instinctually their body is reacting to this negative energy that's in the meat that they're chowing down on.
Maybe.
And I'm speculating huge at that point, I realize, but you got to think these things. We tend to look at things micro, but if you step back 3 steps, you start to see the macro and the bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, there was this, just throw it out there, and a couple things, for the audience, but in Ayurvedic, in the, systems of Ayurvedic, it's all about being basically a vegan, because, some people that follow Ayurvedic, eat a cheese, but, not seeing too many people that are Ayurvedic, eat animal flesh. And they also they do like to use a lot of ghee, but it's clarified butter so that the animal fat is removed. But they say that in Ayurvedics that it takes 7 years of you being, a vegetarian vegan for your body to actually release the memories of what happened to them that are still trapped in your body because you ate them.
Oh, yeah. That's
and how they were treated.
Yeah, and I how long ago did we were friends already when I became vegetarian, weren't we? Mm-hmm. And so I'm about 4 or 5 years in, and I have to admit that if I can use the word sin, I've sinned a few times, because everybody that's in my house, they're all meat eaters too, so I can't dictate to my family what they eat or not eat. So sometimes I'll go to the fridge and there'll be some leftover in the fridge, and I'm starving and I need to eat because I've been out busy cutting firewood or something along those lines. So I fall prey to the meat thing inadvertently too sometimes.
But this is the thing. Don't you overall feel better? They say that, if you're not eating something that has, mammal hormones, right, are accepted as mammal hormones. So you don't have all those crazy hormones because you're not eating stuff that has crazy distress hormones in it. So I think on some level, especially for me being a woman and already being like a hormonal roller coaster ride, limiting, especially like I haven't had dairy. I'm going on 3 years in December. Any dairy whatsoever. And it's like, I don't have a lot of the emotional stuff that I used to have, even though I'm going through menopause at the same time. So, but I don't have all that, memory in that dairy. And also a lot of the dairy is like really poisonous these days, and the stuff they add to it and blah.
Yeah.
And then try to limit the meat. But for me, I feel a lot better, like balanced emotionally, not so pulled one way and the other on the seesaw. It helps, to be a little bit more neutral. And, you think, yeah. So the other thing too, hey, there's this story, that's a quick story. I'll try to tell it really fast. So when I was living in Taos, New Mexico, I don't know, 2006, 2007, I was going to volunteer at this place. There was the Hispanic people that had been there for 400 years of farming, were really good friends with the Pueblo people, the native peoples, and they all worked together. And there was this really amazing place that had a big garden area, had a giant greenhouse. In the wintertime, they grew a barley crop and sold it to like the nearest, brewery. And they also had a huge kitchen in there that was like state certified. And so all these really cool people would go in there and make their products. And there was this one little Hispanic guy who was unbelievable salsa that he made. And people came in and helped him. It was a small kitchen, and he sold it to all the little local stores within an hour and a half. So every week he would come in and make a product. So this was for the community and small business, in agriculture, food preservation, a lot of those different things. And so I used to go over there and I helped them one year to plant a whole bunch of seeds in the transplant trays for the following spring that people can come out and plant this huge garden area. So anyway, one day I was talking because I'm nosy. I go talk to everybody.
Oh, really, Bridgette? You're not
yeah.
nosy, are you?
I am. I'm super nosy. I'm like, I have a lot of questions.
You're like me. I got to stick my nose in. A question pops in my head. I can't leave it sleep.
Yeah. So anyway, the top guys, one was a Hispanic and one was a Pueblo native, and they worked together. They were like the top echelon guys, and they were super funny. Oh my gosh. So I'd ask them like tons of questions, and they were telling me how at this point in time they had started this thing for that area called the Mobile Montanza, and basically it was it was the sacred slaughter, because the Hispanic people had seen how the native people did the sacred slaughter. It's like an ancient kind of ceremony. And so they were totally on board with it. So they had nobody to help small farmers in that area. So if you had like 4, to 10 goats, they could do it. And a couple cows or whatever. And it was a mobile, basically slaughter unit, but it was done by the spiritual part was done by the native sacred slaughter practices. Anyway, it was so unbelievable that I guess when they showed the Whole Foods that was in Santa Fe, which was, I don't know, 2-3 hours away, that the people were just bawling, like everybody was bawling at the ceremony when they showed them, the sacred slaughter. So that Whole Foods was like, we'll buy any meat from any of the farmers that, this practice is done by. But, there's a whole bunch of things that happen, and they get there with the unit and the medicine person, the native guy who's going to help with the slaughter. He does the ceremony and honoring, each individual animal, and then, taking them through all of, the smudging and the prayers and the whole 9 yards through the whole deal. But I never got to see it. But I always thought that's one of the things like that I'm going to have, on my land. So when we do have to take down an animal because, it's aging or, it's very sick or whatever else, we'll be able to do this practice for it, right, and honor it. And then, if we have people on the farm that'll be meat eaters and, chickens and stuff like that, then we can use, the same kind of a thing. But I always thought it would be just so amazing to go and learn that. I mean, what an amazing, thing that is, to honor that animal in like a totally sacred way for whatever reason is necessary.
Oh, absolutely. It's and I think I think you could find that in most cultures, if you went back far enough, European, Asian, across the board, I think you could find that kind of thinking. If you went, I don't know how you'd research that. It's outside of my field, really. But I gotta think that the consciousness we're talking about has had to exist throughout humanity over time, and and as things become compressed, populations grow. Villages become towns, towns become cities, and people lose these things over time. It's sort of how I see it. I don't know, and I look at these things totally speculatively. But I hold these thoughts because a lot of times validation will come up out of the blue when you need it.
Yeah, I agree.
So
yeah.
So it's sort of like you bookmark. It's like you get, I don't know how you. I sometimes think of my brain. There must be like 400 books floating around up in there, with pages open and bookmarked right for some period of time where it's going to come up and that connection will happen, and I'll go, oh yeah, I knew that kinda, but I wasn't sure. So happy for the validation.
Oh, so hey, I wanted to kind of talk about, it's kind of good to have you on because I can just kind of relax and we can just have a conversation about cool stuff that matters. Cool stuff that matters.
Absolutely.
So I was going to talk to you about this whole, because we've had discussions about the corn that I grew this year. And then I've been having discussions with Stephen Smith, who was phenomenal native seed kid. And then also Greg, who's been on my show a couple of times, Sacred Seed guy. Anyway, I've been having conversations with him too, and just about the whole seed thing. And what's really blown me away is the whole native corn. And I only got to grow, and people can go to my YouTube channel and this year, the garden bed that I grew and the corn, and I have tons of videos of the different experiences and things going on with the corn. And I've talked about the corn, but I had other native plants. So what happened was, and I sort of talked about this with Stephen, but I have an upgrade. I have an upgrade to the story. So grew the corn seeds. They were the millennial quick corn. I think they were Hopi. And that Greg had sent me, and I grew like about 12 plants, I think, or whatever. And they were just unbelievable. And just all the spiritual stuff that went along with it. I mean, just supernatural stuff. It was just incredible. But what happened was that the plants had, the corn plants came up, and they had, some would have green stalks, and one had green stalk with red lines down it. I mean, straight lines. And then the corn cob would be that way, green with one red line on it, the outside of the corn. And then there was a black stalk. It was so purple, it was black. And then even the cover on the corn cob was black. It looked really cool when the little strands were fresh and hanging out of it. It just was a trip. And then some of the corn stalks were red. I think one was like purple. But from the same seed, same seed, and then the cobs were as crazy in color as the inside. Well, anyway, on the top of the corn plant, they have these. It looks like crosses. It looks like one post, and then a whole bunch of things cross over it, and they hang down. And that's kind of like the man part, right? And then the girl part is the corn cob that comes out, and then it has the little glistening strands that come out, and that's the girl part. And so what they do is the corn has the ability to be the female and the male, right? So it makes it like a really, perfect kind of thing to grow. Because you don't need anything else to pollinate it. It can totally pollinate itself. So anyway, so then the Hopi sunflowers grew. And the corn influenced everything. Like even some of my herbal plants that usually the flowers would be a little bit more whiter, or, things like that. They kind of had a purplish red hue, right? So you could see how the corn was influencing even like, my medicinal plants when they started to flower for the summer. And then the corn influenced the Hopi sunflowers. Like they grew up, they're all green stalks. And then as they started maturing, they became purple. You know what I mean? On top of the green. There were parts of it that were pretty dark purple. And in the sunflowers, around each little sunflower, there's a little holder, and it would be purple. And then let me tell you really quick, when I cut off the bigger heads of the sunflowers because you have to leave, a third for the environment and the earth. So that I was going to leave whatever other sunflowers were there growing for all the earth and the life there. And then, you take a third and then you share a third kind of a thing. But
yeah.
So when I was breaking apart after cutting off the big heads and letting them dry for 2 weeks, I could feel this purple energy actually come out as I was breaking them apart. It was like releasing this purple energy, and I could feel it around my hands, while I'm doing this. And then as I was doing it, it would run up, and it got to about just my elbows. But I started giggling, like I was high, like I had some kind of like fairy dust kind of high. No, it was pretty funny. So the corn influenced the sunflowers, right? Which they were already pretty supernatural on their own. Hopi sunflowers, there are lots of ceremonies for who knows how long been around those seeds. And then there was the guy's property that I'm on. He did a medical grow, of weed. And he did 7, large plants for his medical license, right? And they were huge. And early on, you could see that the ones closer to my garden, and at one point I started kind of taking care of the corn because the two guys on the land were fighting over the plants, and they were alive, and I was watering my garden, so I just started watering them. Like I don't know how to take care of weed, right? I don't really know how to grow it. I'd grow it the way that I would grow something else, but so I was just being nice to it, so to take care of it. Anyway, the plants that were closest to the corn and the Hopi sunflowers and everything that had been imprinted by the corn, totally imprinted on the plants. And in a way that even my native friend, she came by and she looked at it and she said to me, don't you think these weed plants right here, do you see this purple stem here between the leaf and the plant, the leaf and the stalk? And the stem off that leaf would be like dark purple. And she said, do you see that? And I was like, I totally see it. She said, well, on this side, they don't have it. Only these ones that are this close in this area. I said, yeah, no, I totally get it. So I said, that's what I believe, is that the corn has influenced the whole garden, everything, and has influenced the marijuana. And the plants, not just, not just the, smaller leaves, but the whole plant, even the big leaves were like just super sticky, like the whole thing. And these buds grew huge. Even the landowner was like, wow, these are like buds that we could, take pictures of and send to a magazine kind of a thing. They were huge, and they just kind of were different. You know what I mean? Like different. And even my native friend noticed how different they were. So it encouraged me after that to be like, okay, I don't know how to make, canna, infused canna coconut oil. So got a really good recipe, talked to, Dr. Linney about it, about, chemistry stuff. And I went and made a whole bunch of this, canna oil. And I mostly, really tried to focus in on, getting all the leaf from those plants that had been influenced with the native corn, you know. And I have to tell you that this medicine is like, and it's interesting because I had an email from a friend of mine this morning about it. Right. We've been looking for all kinds of things. Like I work on him, you know, as much as possible. He was in a bad car accident. And so we keep working different canna weeds. You know, he goes into the recreational marijuana store and gets different things to help his back and everything else. But I gave him a jar of this stuff the other day, and it's not like, if I ingested something strong like this canna oil in the past, I would have like totally freaked out and probably barfed. Because that's just kind of how my system deals with edibles. It's not really keen on them. But this one in particular is different because it's pretty strong and it tastes super good, but it has this feeling about it, you know, like you take it and your body relaxes. It's almost like, you know, like the corn mother is looking after you. You know, in a really mother way, like, you know, got you bundled up and nice and warm, and everything's relaxing. And even when you have stressful thoughts, they kind of get pushed away. And you're just in this period of just really feeling like really safe and protected and in this really good, you know, nurturing place. And it's interesting because him taking that finally, he had the first night of sleep he's had since March when he got injured. And he, you know, he has courage because, you know, he's one of my clients and I've really encouraged him to stay away from pharma. And it's been tough. There have been days where he can't even get up and walk, you know, and he's had to deal with that kind of pain. But he said he took the canna oil last night. And he said it was the first night that he got like 7 hours of sleep since March.
Nice.
And it's because it's just so different, and you can feel it healing your body. Like I can feel like a pulse, you know, because I'm releasing the tension in my body, and it's just relaxing. Yeah. It's like I can feel the pulse at the base of my head and my head and my brain, and you know, everything, you know, getting pressurized properly, and you just kind of like, you know, feel good and calm and loved and protected. But I had to add that in because it's like it's turning out to be like unbelievable medicine. So now I'm thinking maybe I should, you know, do a canna oil medicine, you know, and just grow a crop just for that.
I think that's a great idea.
And put it next to the corn. I mean, you know, plant it right in the middle of like 4 varieties of native corn. It would be like super, super medicine. Yeah. Anyway, I can't believe the stuff I'm learning, you know, from this corn. She's just so amazing. You know what I mean? Just.
Yeah. Well, something occurred to me while you were explaining all that, because we've talked about this before a bit in type, right, on Skype, but maybe there's an element in the soil there too that's affecting this. And it's also well water there, if I recall correctly. So the well water would also be pulling from deep down in the ground. Maybe I'm stretching things there a bit, but I got a feeling that there's the soil and the water is having an influence on this as well there.
Yeah, well, and the corn has influence on it too. Because it has those codes, like a lot of these people have been saying, you know, that work with them, that they have, you know, some of them have, like, I think Steve was saying that, and he has something like 2,000 native seeds, and he has the largest collection in the world now, and he said, you know, some of them, you know, can be traced back 5,000 years.
Wow, that's incredible.
And so we have no idea what they know. And he's like, but they know way more than we could ever know. So why not, you know, put them in the ground and see what happens and see what they can change. And it's almost like they're their own, like, computer program. And when you grow them, and Greg and I talked about this on a phone call, but, you know, when you grow them, you know, you have to, you know, be loving and caring towards them, because that's going to go into their code and it's going to travel, right? So everything goes into its encoding. And so wherever it's planted, it would be like, you putting a disk into your computer and downloading, some software.
Oh, yeah.
So it's always going to be in that hard drive system, in that soil, in the water, in the energy field, whether the plant's there or not.
No, I think
to the seed.
There is so much that's coded in this earth everywhere.
Yeah.
Right now, up off the north tip of Vancouver Island on the
okay,
the
so
west
we just have a minute. So when you hear the commercials, then we'll be back after that. But go ahead and finish your story.
I'll start it out quick. They're exploring a village up there that they've just discovered, and the estimated age of that village is at least 14,000 years, and they expect it's much older than that. So that gives you a bit of a timeline. This whole business of the timeline that the cabal for let.
Okay, we'll be right back in 4 minutes.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey there, everybody. This is Carrying Stones and Digging Holes. I'm your host, Bridgette Lyn Dolgoff. Anyway, this is hour number 2 with Gord. Anyway, Gord, do you want to go ahead and start that story over again and finish?
Yeah, it's actually just kind of rolling through. Where did I leave off at there, please?
Civilization was 14,000 years old.
Yes. So it's at least that age, right? And this is right off the top tip of Vancouver Island. Every hereditary in this region, where I'm at the southwest corner of British Columbia of Canada, every hereditary who I've met, and I've met a few, they
explain what a hereditary is. People might not know that.
Oh, right, good point. Hereditary are the elders in the native communities, and they're the ones who are the wisdom carriers. They pass it on through the generations, right down to the young ones as soon as they can start learning. And that's how the knowledge has always come forward. So in the case of these people, right, they all have intimate relationships with Vancouver Island. And I heard this, it's got to be at least 6-7 years ago. And they were saying that Vancouver Island is what's left of Lemuria. Now, I've lived on Vancouver. I've spent a good chunk of my life on Vancouver Island in my earlier forestry days. And there is a lot of uniqueness to that chunk of rock that's sitting out there off the coast. It's quite an amazing area. And there's a lot of real high energy areas in there. It's a lot of white quartz. It's hollow in a lot of areas. There's a lot of caves that run through that island. In logging, we'd find them quite often. These caves. Sometimes we're even making them or knocking holes. You get a big chunk of wood that flips over and hits the ground, and it'll knock a hole into the ground, and you see it's connected into a cave when you go look at it. So what I'm getting to is there's a significance to Vancouver Island, but it kind of points to other things like we really don't know how far back and how deep it all is. The history, which is his story, is starting to expand, and we're starting to get, and that's why I brought this up with UBC, actually stating an age of that age factor, because we've been living under this paradigm where, 7,000 years old, and that's about it. That's humanity, that's the world, that's what they've always wanted us to believe through time in the history books. But we're finding out more and more and more that we're not even close to the actual numbers of the age of this planet. And how many generationals? I mean, there's Bridgette, according to the Hopi, we're going into the 5th extinction.
Yeah, but then, right, the other two, say is with prophecy with Native people is that they, not that I'm an expert or anything, but my teachers have just said that what we would call a prophecy being white is really not a prophecy, it's a vision. And it doesn't become a prophecy until it actually happens. So, anyway, but go ahead. We don't know how old it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that distinction, because, words are important when we talk along these lines, because it can deviate the direction of thought quite readily. I'm one of these people, I don't know about others out there, and I bet you some people out there are going to identify, but my brain never sleeps. The only reason, I'll be in the dream world solving problems like way into the morning, and then finally my bladder kicks me in the head and says, "You got to get up. We got to empty here." And so that ends that thought process. But I always follow the rabbit hole. It's my brain. Sometimes I'll put it away because I just can't make sense of it, but I keep at it eventually. And I'm always pulling these little details together and lining them up and seeing how they fit. And that's sort of what I'm doing now. Is based on what you're telling me, if these plants and where they're growing, where the seeds, the age of these seeds, it blows my mind. 5,000 years, and that we can access these seeds still. That's just amazing. That's stunningly amazing. And so you start looking at these. And I kind of lose my thought process a little bit there, but I'm tying it into like with the forests and everything else that's around here, even some of the beings that live here that are considered, some people would consider them totally fictional, and others would say, well, yeah, that's a good story, or it's a lot of people have, or they put a fear factor to it, right? And I'm talking directly to the Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch have a direct connection to the ETs, and I could say that with confidence because I've experienced it on both levels of that. It's one of the Well, Bridget, you know that history. I've talked to you, and I don't know if you want me to actually delve into all of that yet, or leave it lay, or pick it another time for it, but I'm willing to go in that direction if be.
Well, if that's the direction you want to go in, you can go in it. We have 55 minutes.
Okay. In our Okanagan region, which is sort of like it's the fruit belt of British Columbia, and it's a good area. I like it. And there's a line of extinct volcanoes that runs right down through the Sierra Nevadas, even, and through, I think, go through Washington State, Oregon State, and down. There's these old extinct volcanoes. Actually, up to this end, it might actually stand a little more east than maybe going to other states other than just Washington State. But what I'm getting to is there's an extinct volcano just out in the South Okanagan region of British Columbia that I've frequented a few times. And it was the first time two of my sons and myself and my little cattle dog were camping up there. And the first night, we had a great day of exploration. And the first night, we had a very bizarre, what you would class as an ET experience. And what it was is we're seeing these stars, and then some of them start moving around, right? And they're moving at a speed that just don't match what a star should move at. And then they park, and then they disappear. So you're watching these kinds of things going on. And after these two that we were watching had done that procedure and disappeared, we're kind of just blanking out up in the sky and getting close to thinking about going to bed, and sitting around the campfire. And I see this little pinprick of light out of nothing came this little pinprick of light, and as I'm going, well, that's strange, and I'm looking at it, and I'm watching it. It grew and it grew and it grew, and then there's this big eyeball staring back down at me from up there. And as quick as that all happened, it was almost like I got this feeling that there was a ship up there, and they were zooming right in to see, okay, what are these guys up to down there? And then it disappeared, right? And that was end of story. So it wasn't long after that we went to bed, and it was about 2-3 hours later we awoke. This creature was standing, like its toes had to be just about to where it could clean the wax out of my ears, where I had my head and sleeping in the tent with my dog. And it was loud. It had a very huge, dense voice, and it was speaking in its language for a very long time, seemingly, and then it stopped. And when it stopped, there was this half circle of coyotes that started whooping, and they were responding to this creature. And they stopped, and this cycle repeated 6 times, and then it left. And it's the only conclusion I could come up with in my mind was it was a Sasquatch. And my little dog, she wanted to protect me so bad, and she would run to the opening to get out of the tent, and she'd run back, she'd look me right in the eye, and she would go right up to the wall of the tent where that voice was coming from, and look at it. She so badly wanted to do something, but she didn't. She couldn't understand what to do with that. Right? She's at that time, she would have been 25 pounds at her best, and brave little girl that she is. So I kept her in the tent for sure, because I didn't know what was out there. But after the fact, and once I let my brain digest that, I kind of do wish I'd gotten out of the tent and went and visited with that creature, because, and your friend who you introduced me to, and when I told him this story, the first thing he said, and we're talking about bravado, the first thing he said was, well, did you ask it to speak English? And I thought, well, like such a, why didn't I think that, right? Because I'm sure it would have. And I met on Facebook a long time after that. I met a native fellow on there, and his specific role, this fellow was approached by a Sasquatch on the east end of Kennedy Lake, which is on Vancouver Island. And he was quite frightened. He was admittedly very frightened. And but this Sasquatch engaged him and talked to him and told him, hey, look, we are mediums between you, the people of Earth, and the ETs. And we get messages, and you're chosen. Basically, he told this fellow that he was chosen to be a recipient of messages. So, and he goes to this region in the Okanagan quite a bit. And as it turned out, that very night with this experience I had, he was there as well. And he said, and I don't know how the timelines quite corresponded, but he was sleeping in a bus that had been converted into a camper. He said that Sasquatch had come down to talk to him and was banging on the roof of that to wake him up. So we both had the way I understand this. We both had this an experience of the same Sasquatch that same night. So yeah, like Bravado had said, I sure wish I understood that, because if I'd asked it to speak English, I would have way more to add to this story. But it kind of set off a relationship that started a whole new direction for myself, because up to this point I was kind of, and there's a mountain here that right basically in my backyard here where I live, and according to the Cavers Club, this mountain is hollow. It's not necessarily volcanic. It may have been way back, but it definitely shows no signs of that now. A lot of white quartz in the makeup of this mountain. It's hollow. There's several caves that go into it, according to the Cavers Club. And up there's a sacred little lake that's been used historically by the local native peoples here. They don't really do much up there anymore that I've seen. I've been up around there a few times, and I don't see them up there. So I really don't know what direction, if any, that's taken on. But that little lake was used sacred, and there's a sinkhole just above where the lake is. So when the freshet happens after all the snow that falls up there melts, it'll drain out through there, and it'll leave the lake at its regular elevation. And it's really more of a pond than a lake, but it's referred to as a lake in the local native writings. And so what I'm getting to is up in that mountain. That first place in it's called Crater Mountain in the Okanagan, and that experience, and then up here, that's when I've been going up there in different areas, but that's where I started having Sasquatch experiences again. And other experiences too, where I've learned some things about my previous lives, which had a native aspect to them, as I read the signs as they came to me as I went up there. So I'm kind of running out of steam on that one. I had a direction I was going to, but sometimes I get a little bit carried away in the back story and I forget a bit of the front story that I was building to. I can't remember the point I was going to make there, Bridgette. Sorry.
Uh-oh. Sometimes, a friend of mine calls it sometimers. Sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a timer for the sum, but yeah, it's. I guess what I'm getting to, I mean, the back end of that story really is not as important as the build to it. It's in my way of thinking for now is a lot of times when we go out there, we kind of tend to turn off aspects of ourselves when we're out there, and we don't. When you go out into nature and play, especially these high energy locations, there are things like you'll go and you'll feel a vibration come up through your legs, going up toward, going through your chakras, I would think, and it's the earth at these points that's trying to communicate with you. Life and death happens on these mountains all the time, and the spirits still remain, and these spirits work with the earth, and there's connections that can happen through this chain of I don't like to use the word command, but it's sort of a chain of my vocabulary is leaving me alone on this one. It's just basically you follow it, and there's little ties that one leads to the next, and next thing you know, you come through at a fairly substantial revelation that can be important to the rest of your life, which in my case, it was very much that way. And it set me off in a whole different way of looking at things from what I was, right? And how I see this, and I've mentioned before that I used to log in the forest industry here, and I spent a good deal of my life doing that, running heavy equipment before I finally left it. And I've seen a lot of this province. I've been to some really unique magical areas all up and down the coast, and on the Haida Quay as well. And I look back, and it's all bringing me up to now. So a new consciousness is what has I've come into, and a whole new way of thinking. And the more I engage it, the more I find that nature, spirituality, it's speaking with me, and it's taking the time to explain things to me. And I've got a number of friends in the United States, and I relay these stories of my hiking and explorations. And the first thing when I stop talking is that they ask me, says, "Well, what gun do you carry?" And I think, "What? Why would I need a gun? I'm going up. Everything up there is my friend. Everything." Right? Sometimes I got to tread extra careful, because where I'm going, it's all loose rock, and if I'm not respectful, it might just decide that I'm not a friend. Right? So you got to kind of keep yourself in line with where you are. It's like going to a very special person who you know is home on invite. Right? You got to be respectful at that home. It's just natural to be that way. It's the same thing when you're out in the woods. Everywhere you go, it doesn't matter, a mountain, a meadow, a creekside, you're at somebody's home. Right? Somebody lives there when you're not there. And so you're in a home. So you got to be respectful of everything that you come across out there. And everything has spirit. Everything has energy. So you can't. It's not always animated when I'm talking. What I'm talking about, right? It could be, it's that big stone next to you could have all kinds of historic energy that you would never ever recognize unless you tapped into it or allowed it to tap into you. You've probably had experiences similar to that, I suspect, Bridgette.
Yeah, everything talks to me since I was a little kid. Sometimes I have to tell it to be quiet.
Yeah.
Be quiet. No, the other thing too, people, you just have to start paying attention. You have to just stop. I see so many people running from like point A to B. The other day, somebody I know, and they're just like running, like, life is like this marathon, trying to get from like point A to point B. Okay, if I make it and I get all this stuff paid for the next year, I'll be in the free and clear. Well, it never works out that way. And we take all that time running that marathon of life thinking we can get from here to here during this period, that everything's going to be okay, and probably it's not going to be okay. And then you spend all that time and energy in life focused on the money, getting the rent paid, all these other things, instead of the focus of what your inner world was like.
Well, time is absolutely fluid. And we have this, the only thing that keeps us from seeing it that way is the wristwatch we wear and the clock that's on the dash of your car as you're trying to get to that meeting that you're probably going to miss because traffic is worse than you thought it would be, and on and on and on. Right? This concept of time is almost like a trap, right? Because it holds you to specific things. When you step outside of that and you leave time behind, where you just go, right? Of course, as it starts to get dark, you got to start thinking about where am I going to sleep? Have I got shelter handy? Can I get back home in time? But other than daybreak and sunset, right? We really have no other marks of time that we need to pay attention to, in my opinion. Because it holds you. And I get it. There's going to be people that are listening to this probably that are going to go, well, yeah, but I still got to get to work on time, and then we have rush hour, and we have all these other things. But
yeah, one of the two most powerful quotes that, that I have loved my whole life. One of them, both of them come out of the Lynn Andrews books, Medicine Woman books that came out in the 80s. I think I read them in high school, late high school. Anyway, one of her quotes is so mind-blowing about time. And basically, a life predicted by time.
Oh, good title.
No, that's just the whole quote. A life predicted by time. Yeah. So that everything, your whole life is predictable by the time. What time is it? It's noon. Well, every day at noon I go to lunch from my job. All these different things that are predicting your time. And so you're not predicting your time. And then the other one was that I really liked out of that book was all things exist by agreement. That's another quote. All things exist by agreement. By you're agreeing to them. And so because you agree to them, you'll have a life predicted by time.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings another memory back to me, and I've told you this, I know I have. My second day in grade 1. So it was a September day, nice sunny day. My mother, drove me to the school, which actually was really close to the house, but I had a reputation as a child for running away from home a lot. So I think she wanted to make sure that I actually got into the building. So she drove me to the building. It had 2 classrooms in it. It was an old school, and then the bigger school was built next to it later on. So grade 1, and she says, you go into the building and then you spend the day there, and then after, when it's done, you can come home. So okay, I go in and I'm sitting there, and the next day I go on my own, and same classroom, and now it's starting to feel like getting a little used to it. So, and I'm sitting there in the class, and I think I was one row over from the windows, and I'm looking out the window outside, nice sunny day, and I'm thinking, why am I here? What am I supposed to do here? I'm thinking this, right? And a voice, very distinctly, as distinct as your voice when you talk, said, you don't belong here. And at that time, I'm only like 6 years old at that time, and so I didn't really get the message, but that it hasn't, the clarity of that message has never wavered. It's always been that clear all the way through, right? So, and I was really fortunate in a way, because the grade 5 teacher I had at that same school, I don't know how he knew, but because this is gets a little more vague at this point, but he flat out told me, he says, when you turn 16, you don't need your parents' permission to quit school. And somehow he knew that I didn't belong in there from that perspective, but as it was, I was stuck, right? So what he was doing, I believe, he was giving me heart for how to, that, because I really never ever gelled with school, never. In arts and things like that, I could do okay, and that's this particular teacher. He actually saw that, and he actually helped. I grew a bit in the world of art and sketching and drawing and painting and stuff like that. Other than that, right, learning to read and spell and a bit of arithmetic, school to me was largely a waste of time. And when I turned 16, that very day, I quit school. And that was April, and it was September. It was about the same period of the month as my birthday in September, and that's when I started working in the logging industry out on the west coast of Vancouver Island, in beautiful Ucluelet, Tofino region, right? And Long Beach is there, lots of people. There's probably people that are listening to this that know Long Beach and either wish to chance to go visit and camp there or already have. It's a beautiful area, it's a stunning area. And I was staying with my dad. He got a job out there working for the company, repairing their equipment, keeping their equipment up, and he was a really good mechanic. And we're staying in a little panable cabin right on the waterfront, right by the ocean. And there was a small river that emptied into the ocean right by where these cabins were built. It was just a fantastic place. I could wade across the river. It was just above my knees. if I timed it right with the tides. And I can go out, and it was just blown sand dunes all down along through the coastline. It was just gorgeous. I ended up hiking that almost all the coast between Tofino and Ucluelet, and had some fantastic experiences with eagles and otters. And I got stuck at one point. The direction to go return. There's only so many access points to the waterfront from the highway there, and the bush gets really dense right along the coast. So you really have little hope of getting through the bush if you got to go cross over. So once you start down the coastline, you got to kind of finish it until you can come to another, which takes several hours of hiking. And I got stuck, and I had to go. I couldn't get through this bush, and the tide was up, and the surf was pounding. Like I couldn't risk going down through this little canyon that brought me right down to the edge of the water surface there. It was too risky to take that down there too. You get swept out to sea very quickly there if you got into the water in a situation like that. And so I'm kind of stuck, and I'm weighing out the options of returning back the way I came, which would have taken me quite a long time, would have put me into dusk. And I look down, and there's these otter holes through the trails underneath the brush, and I could just squeeze myself down enough to crawl through these otter holes, and that's how I got through. And then it bust through, and I had open ground in another hour and a half or so. I was back up to the highway to hitchhike back to where I was staying. But it was a beautiful experience, beautiful growth, living out there and growing. It's a really magical area. Anybody who's listening who hasn't, I do advise go out there, even though it's very touristy now, way more so than it was back in those days. It's still well worth going out there. You can do the coastal trail. There's a couple of points you can access it through. Bamfield as part of that process with it's the West Coast Trail. You got to apply and qualify, and they only allow so many people at a time to do it. And pretty controlled, but it's still a great experience.
Yeah, there was, back when I was doing a lot of backcountry, like backpacking, a group of us were going to do the West Coast Trail on the island. And you have to apply like something a year in advance. I think it's only open for 7 months. And there's books written on it. I have a couple books on how to survive it. But they consider it pretty arduous. It's listed as arduous. And the history of it is from the... so a lot of people perished on that part of the island because ships would come in and they'd be like storms. And then the ships would break apart or whatever, and the people would end up floating to that part of the island would perish trying to get out of it because, it's pretty rugged. And so... over time, they put in these bridges and different things for people to be able to get out of there and to somewhere safe so they didn't perish from shipwrecks and stuff. And then that became the trail over time. Yeah,
it was a survivor's trail.
Yeah, and, yeah, exactly.
It's very rare. Where the town of Ucluelet is, and probably Tofino too, they've really kind of, it's become rich people's kind of places to live these days. But I actually went on Google Earth a while back because I'd phoned up a friend a few years back just to say hi, and he just told me, he says, "Gord, don't come back here. You won't like it here anymore." He was there, and he's in his 80s now, I believe. Anyway, he used to have the gas station. He was a mechanic. He still does mechanical work. He gave up the selling of the gas. But I went on Google Earth after I talked to him and just had a quick look. And that whole coastline, that Ucluelet's built on a peninsula. And so you got... inside waters on the south side of the peninsula, and then on the north side you're exposed to the open ocean, and you go right down there, and all these areas with these big beautiful trees that grew along there. I can remember walking along in storms, sometimes going back home, walking along there, pouring rain, powerful winds, like it's just gusting. It'll gust 89 mile an hour along there off the ocean. And these big balsam trees, they're bent, they're poker straight going right up, and these things are about 2 to 3 feet in diameter at the stump, and they're bent right over. They're laying way over under the force of the wind, right over my head. And I'm looking up at these trees and I'm thinking, oh boy, what am I doing here? But they're a very wind firm tree. And I'm thinking they took all those trees out so they could build their I don't know, they're probably half acre, 3/4 acre lots from what it looks like from Google Earth. And they're building their big, beautiful homes all along there. They take all the trees out to enhance their views, but they dehance the whole coastal area by doing so. And you're right, there's a lot of shipwrecks. Even right outside of town, the Co-op grocery store there, you follow the trail in behind the store down. There's a little fjord out of the coming up off the ocean front there. You go right down, and there's the remains of a wooden ship right up on I believe it's still there today. Right up on the rocks. It was pushed way up high on the rocks, and it's sort of solidified itself there. Valencia Bay, I think there's 3 Spanish ships that are sunk in the opening into that bay, which is close to where the old Wiccaninnish Inn was. But that whole coast, there's maps. You can go and look at the shipwreck count. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of shipwrecks all up and down that coast. There's even on Nick Island, there's a book that was written on it. There was a fur trader ship that went in there, and they're trying to hash out a deal with the local tribe there, and it went wrong. Went really wrong, and the natives were not happy with the way these guys were pressuring the deals, and they were feeling kind of really getting ripped off. So that night they went on and they attacked that ship, and everybody except 2 of them perished to that ship. The ship was burnt to the waterline and sank, so it's at the bottom of that bay in there. And the 2 English sailors that remained, they became slaves from that village. But they soon, as they learned the language and started to know the people, they ended up actually quite liking where they were. They had, and they were treated really good. They talked about the potlatches and different events that would take place there back in those days, and it's a good book if you can find it. Can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but a Google search net would probably bring it up. So yeah, it's a very interesting area. There's a part of me that really misses living there, but it's when I lived there, BC Ferries was so you could just drive up and get on the ferry and cross over into Vancouver or vice versa heading back. It wasn't all that complex. Now it takes time. You got to plan. You can't just randomly go and do it and hope to get across. So another beautiful area. I'm actually that's why I don't get around much outside of BC, because I haven't really finished exploring this province yet. And I've seen a lot of it. Right? There's a lot more to see.
Yeah, well, they say beautiful British Columbia, and I can attest. Before I knew Gord, I used to travel up there a lot. So I had different friends up there. And I think the last trip that I was there was October 2010. And so I met Gord 5 years ago, I think.
Yeah, it'd be about then.
No, yeah, this will be 5th winter that I've known Gord. So I knew him after that. I used to travel there. And it is a beautiful place. One of the most beautiful things is to go, and you go out a mission, and there's like these, peakish, hills, and they have like tons of forest on them, like a carpet. And when it snows, you can see like a snow line across the trees. It's super cool. It's like the coolest thing ever. Mm-hmm. Where it comes down to a certain line, and I mean it's like the perfect line all the way down, and then you have the snow that's above it. It's a definitely beautiful place. Going up there, once you get out of get into those forests up there.
Since this journey, since that Sasquatch up on Crater Mountain kind of awoke me, for lack of better wording, and brought me into what I was meant to be. I do believe I was meant to be what I'm doing now. Everything's been an education to this point that I'm in now. And is the energetic areas that are around here. There are so many powerful energetic areas around this province. I've recently, in the last, I can't remember now, since it's coming up to getting into the second year, well into the second year, the native couple I know up north, he's a native holy man and she's a medicine woman. Both can do healing work. And I've had some pretty phenomenal experiences with this friend of mine up there, Joe. He's taken me into some very unique areas. He's also known as the knowledge keeper for his people, and he's a walking encyclopedia. He never lacks for an original story when I go to meet with him, and he's always coming up with these amazing stories. And there's so many high energy points. One of the ones, and this is actually mostly in the United States, is the megaliths in Montana, which actually cross a little bit over into the Alberta side of that, because it's that close to Canada. That's a bit of this extends into Alberta as well, which I think is pretty close to the foothills on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. You know about this area, I think. Have you been there, Bridget?
No, there was a lady who I was following that there was telling people that there was going to be this huge native ceremony, I think something like 2 or 3 Septembers ago, and the native people were going to do these activations, and she was taking pictures of and showing some of the rock art, original people's rock art. There was like, I think, an eagle, and when people had their photographs taken there, they'd have halos or weird energy forms, like color light forms in the photos or on them. And these the native people up there were going to do like an activation for the stones there, because I guess they've been sleeping a long time and they've been hidden, and the stones were ready to kind of wake up, I guess. So I never really heard what had happened from that point. I didn't really get along with this lady. This lady was like extremely rude to me when I wanted to actually come, to the Montana. I was seeking information about coming, and it seemed like it was wide open. And then she just wasn't a really nice lady. Let's just say, she kind of attacked me at some point. So we got into it, and then I wasn't welcome, by her standards, to come to the ceremony or whatever. So I never really saw anything on Facebook after that about if the activation took place or what had happened or blah, 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 blah.
She may have felt threatened by you.
Well, I don't know. I just asked,
Yeah. Well, sometimes, it's...
Yeah.
People get sensitive about these things, and it is a very energetic area. My friend Joe had gone there, and that's why I brought it up in the initial. He told me the story of going there. He had he described it as a brand new S10 pickup truck, and he had wheeled by there, and so everything's brand new, the battery included. So he parked. It was about a 4-hour cycle to go through. It was kind of like you go in there and you get in with a group, and you get taken through all these different areas, and you can go explore it out. And when he got back to his truck, the battery was stone dead. It wouldn't even twitch the starter motor. And and this guy's a very energetic person, and spiritually speaking. So he knew something was up, right? And it's speaking to the energies of that region, right? They identified with him, and they identified with his vehicle, and they probably kept the battery because they probably wanted him to stay there for some reason. I don't know if you've seen this story, but and it might have been part of what you were denied to be a part of there with that lady. they had a shaman person come up there, and there's all these glyphs that are either carved or painted on these stones, and there are some on there, and the shaman could put his hand right over the glyph and hold it there, and all the information that was coded in that glyph would be uploaded into that shaman. And I found that quite fascinating.
Well, no, but that's what the Anastasia books are about. Mm-hmm. Is, towards the end of them, she talks about that. She talks about some of the oldest, megaliths are in Russia, in this certain area, and they look like boxes. They've been put up by, in like box shapes, and what she said, and this might be like several types of information coming together, her and some other people.
It usually is.
I know. So just if people don't read that in the Anastasia books, I'd be like, where the hell did she get all that information? So I apologize. But anyway, so Anastasia says that the red dress people, which were some of the oldest people, in that area, shamanic people, they were so conscious and enlightened that when they chose to physically die inside these megalithic boxes, so that all of their information and energetic libraries of vast knowledge and vast wisdom would be left in those megaliths. So if you were vibrating at a certain, level at that point in time, that you could come to the same place and I learned this from Lujan, the same timeline place at that particular moment, then all that information can be downloaded into you.
That's incredible.
Yeah, and Lujan Matus, one thing, back when I first originally had a TV show, I forget what network I was on, online, and I had Lujan. I got the great privilege to interview Lujan Matus like twice. But the first time I was going to interview him, I couldn't believe he said yes. And then he was on my show. Uh-oh, there's music.
Are we getting another commercial?
No, but I'm hearing something on the line. No. Okay, so anyway, what happened with him was he's vibrating at a different, I'm not going to say like some energies are up or lower or whatever. But you have to sometimes people are so conscious that in order to get on the real time, timeline with them, you have to do some major shifting. And so it ended up, Lujan was going to come on my show like immediately in 5 days. I probably needed like about 3 weeks to process his energy, And so it was really difficult for me to get to the place that I needed to get in order to have him on the show in real time. We had all kinds of electrical problems. It took a lot for me to be able to get myself together in a way that could sort it out on that timeline. So when you're dealing with a timeline and say, a shamanic megalith, it's vibrating at a certain place in time, right, on a timeline in real time, but you have to be at that place. You know what I mean? You have to get yourself at that place. And sometimes shamans and medicine people, people that may even do, types of voodoo, lots of different medicine, shaman type work. If they get at that point, then they can actually vibrate in real time on the past timeline, at the point where all that information is held. So if an average person went there and didn't have, the same experience, they could be, greatly disappointed. Or if they didn't go, in honor and respect, then, possibly negative things could happen to them, without going in and, being humble and going in there, and realizing like it is like some kind of power place.
Oh, absolutely.
And so this is an interesting thing, the Paiutes, the Pyramid Lake, because there's an actual pyramid. And there's a lot of weird shit. I've been going out there off and on my entire life. My parents really loved it out there when I was growing up. And there are a lot of, let's just say, supernatural things that go on out there because of the the medicine and the vibrations, and sometimes that stuff leaks through. And you can have large scale amount of people actually, have that experience, like just camping there.
Well, you got to think of all the chains that have been broken through the European movements from east to west across this continent, right? I'm talking Canada as well as the United States. And in both cases, it comes from the west as well, right? Because you had cities establishing on the west coast as well as the continent. You think about the amount of energetic interferences that have gone on through all of that. I remember in reading Black Elk Speaks, and this is where I started rethinking my whole attitude towards the infamous cottonwood tree that we talked about right from the beginning. Because there was down, and this is from his book, right, the greasy grass, which is what the rivers were called by the natives. That confluence where Custer's last stand took place. There was a cottonwood tree, and it was a very, very special tree, and they used it for ceremonial purposes. And I kind of, when I'm reading the book, I'm kind of going, really, a cottonwood tree for ceremonial services? I just didn't see the connect at that time. Now I fully see it, right? I'm going in here and I'm relating to these trees on a daily basis where I take my dog to walk, and it's at the point now when I enter, I park my vehicle. They got parking lots laid out. It's actually very pedestrian. It's laid out for, you got people riding bikes on it's a dual dike system with the river, and it's called the Chilliwack River. It comes down out of the mountains, and it can be prone to contribute to flooding in the freshet. So it's all pretty tamed down now with a mini dike right beside and then a larger dike. So these trails are kind of in between the two dikes, but very, very, very pleasing. And so I park, and my dog and I get out, and we enter. Now when I go in, even before I get out of the sunlight, direct sunlight, and into the shade of the forest, the energy is starting to reach me, right? So that this cottonwood tree that me, the old logger, used to poo-poo because it's not the same value as a Douglas fir or a red cedar or whichever, right? It's in my mind now. I'm fully seeing and understanding and appreciating the value these trees hold, right? And in some ways, because they're not a construction grade lumber tree, in a lot of ways, now that I'm thinking about it more in depth, they're probably even more special than those trees. Not to devalue those other trees. Did you ever get a chance to go down the bottom of Chilliwack Lake where that heritage forest is down there, Bridgette?
Not that I know of. Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's actually a shared forest with the American side, because the border actually cuts right through pretty much the center of it. You can take the trail. Actually, you end up on the road that takes you to the name of the mountain, the big snow mountain that's there.
Oh, Mount Baker.
Yeah, Baker.
Oh, I've actually. Well, I've been there. I went there in winter to do a glacier rescue climbing course.
Mm-hmm.
But there was snow, and so we carried 85-pound packs up Mount Baker in knee-foot of snow.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, for 6 days. Yeah.
Hey, you're in good shape to do that.
Yeah, well, that was back when I was 38.
Okay, I hear you.
When I was younger. But yeah, I think
anyway,
I was up there. But I didn't get to see the old growth and stuff because it was in the snow, right? A lot of stuff was covered.
Yeah, it would be, but these trees are monsters. Like, they're huge. There's cedar trees there. You can put 4 adults side by side, full-grown adults, and there's lots of tree on either side of that collective standing in front of it. And they're huge. These are trees that were there when the Europeans first started sailing wooden ships into Seattle and Vancouver Harbor and all these places. These trees were already well established back then.
Yeah, so I have this story about, I was like 23. I was kind of sick of Reno. A friend of mine kind of encouraged me to move. ended up moving to kind of the border of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Spokane, Washington. And mind you, this was a long time ago. So this would have been like 27 years ago. And I was bartending part-time. Eventually, I was just bartending part-time, and I was working with this Lakota Sioux medicine woman I ended up doing an apprenticeship with. But before that, I worked at this one bar a couple nights a week that was just beer and wine, and it was an old-timers bar, right? So it was kind of, and back then, Coeur d'Alene was a little bit more rustic, than it is now. And so these old timers would say, hey, you guys, you want to come out fishing? And I was like, sure, I'd like to go out fishing. This one bar I worked at was super fun because it was an old family. They were super nice. They had huge barbecues in the back all the time, horseshoes. Oh, cool. A lot of the old timers came, and their sons who were like cops and stuff, during that time period would actually, come check on them and get them at 10 o'clock at night when the bar closed so they didn't drive home drunk. It was that kind of a town.
Yeah.
And so I went with these old timers in this boat, and I don't even remember where we went, but it was right outside of Coeur d'Alene in this forest. And so we went on this lake, we went across the water, and we got to this other side, and we walked in, and there were it was like one of the most probably shocking and things that I probably have ever seen. But there was this particular type of, and I don't know the exact name of it, but this red fir tree, and it was like the only place where this sucker grew, this particular species. And they showed where the logging, had taken place, and that they cleared every single one of them. These things were huge. I mean, they were what was left, the bottom part and all the rings. Literally, you could stand in the middle of it, and it was probably at least 12 foot by 12 foot.
Yeah.
And they had taken every single tree and didn't even leave one. And so, because of the logging, it was completely extinct. But the thing was, it was hard because then we were going to fish and stuff, and I tried to fish, but my brain was so, kind of effed up after I saw that forest that was completely gone and been gone, for something like 60 years or something like that.
The stumps probably remained though, huh?
Yeah, and there were, things trying to grow out of the stumps. I mean, quite a few of them are pretty decayed, but, the whole thing was that you just, you can't get that back. And, sometimes I have to think about, upbringing and thoughts and, converting my whole self to more of the native way and more of the systems of beliefs. There are patterns that I have that, were, implied in my reality that, I accepted at some point, and breaking those belief systems. And periodically when you run into something like that, I don't know how long it would take for a tree that's 12 foot by 12 foot to grow. Is it like a 3,000-year-old tree, a 2,000-year-old tree? But it's not something that we can get back in my lifetime.
Well, in that climate zone that you described in there, it would be a slow-growing forest in there. It would take, you're talking many centuries for the tree to get that old, that size.
Yeah, but it also need the perfect environment. It needs lots of different things.
There's a dozens of elements that go together to put that to give that forest, to get it there. These trees I'm describing down here, you got, on the west coast of Vancouver Island, you're talking tree size. I've seen red cedar that were 20 feet across on the stump.
Wow.
You got and the spruce trees, I think they were spruce.
Yeah.
There's some of those. We had to get permits for the logging trucks. You'd make a bed, and you had to cut them as you couldn't go too short. right? And this is like really tight grain. These trees, I don't know how ancient, they were thousands of years old. They had to be, because some of these trees were 24 feet across.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, and then, you think about like, yeah. So we have 2 minutes. It always goes by so fast. Anyway,
it did go quick. How'd that happen?
Know. So you're listening to Carrying Stones, the Digging Holes radio show. I'm Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A. And I've had one of my, good friends on today, Gordon. We've been talking about all kinds of stuff, but it keeps coming around trees and forest and back to trees and forest.
It does, doesn't it?
Forest. So it's been good because plant a tree. Give somebody a really beautiful tree for Christmas that they can pick up in spring. Get them an heirloom fruit tree that they can plant in their yard that can actually feed them and feed nature as well. But, maybe a good Christmas gift this year would be, give somebody the gift of a tree and get more trees planted. I think last year we were at -4 oxygen levels. That's what Richard Allen Miller was saying. And so, we can't live without trees.
And
we need to really
more in the ground. That.
What?
I got to add to this before the time runs out. Oh, shoot.
Hurry.
Shoot. Hurry. Hug a tree. Stop. Take the time to stop. Kiss a tree. Tell them that you love it. All
right. Bye, Gordon.
Bye-bye.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Revolution Radio.
You don't see it, do you? How close we are to absolute chaos? The sick ones are sitting on their fat asses, eating and drink themselves into a stupor, polluting the world without a second thought while it goes down the toilet. Nobody wants to do the nasty work. The shit that we all just think about. Most good citizens are just along for the ride and then bitch and moan and complain about everything when it doesn't work out. Not me. Get it done.
Revolution Radio, where we do the nasty work. www.freedomslips.com.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. You tell them
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio.